Hello everyone, my name is Daniel. I'm a LAND4 product specialist at LAND Software. And the following part of the video, it's an introduction to the LAND4 elements, tools, and settings. Our goal is to understand how to create and control these objects in order to design the land surface. But first, let's start with the LAND4 interface tour. So once you install your LAND4 in Archicad, you will have a new menu where you can show your LAND4 palette. This palette can be docked into the Archicad menu. And then as you can see, it contains subgroups for each of the LAND4 tools and functionalities. Back to LAND4 menu, the next is the license information, where you have the option to load or unload your license file, but you also have information about the owner and the version number, which also is shown on top of the main palette. The next button is a link to our help center where you can find more videos about LAND4. Then we have the group palettes. These palettes can also be docked into Archicad's menu or just have them anywhere on your screen. They are basically the same palettes you find on the main LAND4 palette. They are just divided into individual palettes. Now that you've been introduced to the LAND4 palettes and groups, we can continue with the model view options. Here you have a menu called Options for LAND4, which is also divided into 4 different menus for each of the LAND4 elements. I will return with more detailed explanations and informations on how the model view options and how these settings are basically interfering with the LAND4 objects. The LAND4 categories. Before starting to work with LAND4 elements and tools, it's important to understand the LAND4 categories. They will help you to structure better your project and to have a more efficient workflow. The LAND4 categories menu sits the last on the palette, and here you have a pick box where you can basically show or pick the active category. Then you have a couple of tools. You can copy to category, check duplicates, or have a selection palette where you can select elements based on their category, but also you have the category settings. Here you have the option to add, modify, or delete a category, and these are basically the default categories you get in your project when you start working with LAND4. Moreover, you can hide or show your categories from the main pick box, or you can import and export your category settings for further use in the project. During this video, we will cover all these functions. When you select your spot levels, you will see the active category that is the elements are in. If, for instance, I change the category for some of the spot levels, you just select them, and then using the pick box, you just change them into another category. Then in the MVO, you also have options under the options for LAND4 and spot level. You can basically have a certain appearance for your categories. So here you can change the appearance for a certain category. So I can change the text span, for instance, to another color. But you also have other options such as brackets, underscore, or show your ID for your spot levels in that category. Now, these spot levels are basically using the options we have used in the MVO according to that category. If I make a selection of a spot level from another category, you can see now on the pick box that that's showing the category of that specific element that it's selected. When you hit escape and nothing is selected, you see again the active category. If I select multiple elements from different categories, then the pick box will show varies. Now that we covered the main functionality of the categories and the pick box, we can go further in the category settings. So here you can set and assign a layer to a certain category. Therefore, in the layer menu, I have created 2 new layers for each of the categories that I'm planning to work with. Therefore, back into the category settings, I can select the category, press modify, and then select a layer that I want the elements within the category to be placed in. Then I press modify, and I can do the same for the new, assign the new layer. If I hit OK, and now if I select an element in existing, we can see that it's placed in existing, but also it changed the layer from Archicad layer to existing. And same with the new ones. So that's the way to basically control your layer and your category through the category settings. If I want to hide, for instance, demolished, it's one of the category we won't use, press OK. Now it won't be part of the pick box. This function can be used when you have a lot of categories in your project and you need space in the pick box. Before creating a new category, if you want to have a certain layer in that category, you have to create a layer, which I'll call cat A, and then hit OK. Now in the category settings, I basically press on add, give it a name, and then I will select the layer I want to assign to that category. Here you can also decide for each element within the category where you can have a certain layer assigned to each of the LAND4 elements. If you want to have a general layer for all of them, you simply leave unchecked that and have a certain layer for that. Once I press add, we can see now the category is added in there, and I say OK. Then I have a new category in here. So if I select that, now it's the active category, so I can place a spot level within that category. If the layer is invisible, you will get a message where you ask if you want to make this layer combination visible. So if I say yes, my spot level will be placed in there. I can add another one here. And when I select it, we can see that it's placed in the right layer and the right category. Once again, if I go to the MVO, I will also have it in here as a new layer where I can also pick another color for the pen and for the marker type. Therefore, in the MVO, you can have a certain appearance for each of the categories. Here I placed another one, which I can mark in orange. So for the boundary spot levels, I can just select them. We can see now they are in existing, and I place them into boundary. Then they will follow the settings set in the MVO. Copy to category function allows you to copy elements from one category to another. So if I take, for instance, terrain, I can see it's in new. I can copy it to a certain category. So if I say cat A, then the element is copied now into cat A category. We can see they are overlapped. If I move the text out, basically the spot level it's in the same place while the text is moved. However, we can see on the text that the information set into the settings of the spot level, of the previous spot level, is been also copied, and also together with the settings inputted in the selection settings of the spot level. The next tool is the selection palette. This is a powerful tool for selecting elements in your project based on your categories. So here, if I want to select elements in category A and spot levels, and I press select, we can see that only the elements within that category are now selected. Of course, you can also include in your selection ridge lines, fall lines, LANDSurfaces, or so on. You can also select, of course, other categories or multiple categories at the same time. Another efficient tool in your project can be checking for duplicates. So this tool basically checks for duplicates, which means you have elements or objects that they are basically the same. So if I take these ones and I copy paste them over, now if using tab, we can see that they are basically the same spot levels using the same category. So if I check duplicates, if I use this tool and I want to go into existing where these points are, and I use all the active layers, let's say, and press check, we will have 3 points found. I can also find them on the screen, so the add-on will zoom in to those elements. Now that they are selected, I can delete them. If I run it again, I have no duplicates now. However, if I copy them to categories, so from existing to new, now they are overlapped, but they're not duplicates because they are in different categories. So if I say all categories, all layers, I have no duplicates because these ones are in different layer. This tool can be very efficient when dealing with large number of spot levels in a big project, and you risk the chance to have duplicates, which will slow down your project and the land surface creation. While all LAND4 categories are well defined and structured in the category settings and following the MVO, the uncategorized category, when you set an element to uncategorized category, you are having more freedom to set a layer either in the layer management or just by adding it in the layer control from the object selection settings, just like you would do to any other Archicad object. This category is created for the purpose of giving you more freedom to set your layers for those elements within this category. The LAND4 spot levels. The spot level is a 3D point which you can use to control the land surface, but also to document an elevation in your project. So the spot level groups lays the first on the palette, where the first button allows you to place a spot level where you input an elevation based on your project units, and then you simply click it on the screen. Then you can select and change the location of the text while you keep the spot level position into place. Other tools that you can use is placing a spot level with a separate input. That means you can click the spot level in a location and the text into another place. Of course, you can always change back the location of the text. Once you have your spot level, you can visualize it in the 3D, and you can change the elevation or the position of the spot level with, let's say, I'll elevate it 1 meter, and that means your spot level in the plan view will update with that change. Another setting regards the spot level text is that you can hide or show all the spot level text at the same time. The next tool I'm going to show you is the elevation palette. This palette works with 2 spot levels, so you can activate the button, and then when you select 2 spot levels, you get the elevation palette. This shows you basically 3 parameters where you can lock one of them. So if I lock the 20-meter spot level and I change the fall in between, the other one will update accordingly. I can of course also lock the elevation or the spot level, one of the spot levels, and then just simply change the elevation of the other one while the fall in between will update. In the following, I will show you the various interpolation tools used for parametric calculated spot levels. The first interpolation tool we're going to use is the 2-point interpolation. So if you have 2 spot levels and you select them, then you can activate the 2-point interpolation function. This gives you the pen symbol, and that means you can now interpolate a spot level based on these 2 selected ones. So if I now place a couple of spot levels and also show the dependencies, we can see the parent points. These dependency lines point toward the parent points. But you can also see that they are dependent, which means if I move them, they will update in relation with the parent points. The easiest to understand the principle of the 2-point interpolation is to see the spot level interpolated in the middle of the initial or the parent spot levels. When interpolating a spot level using LAND4 tools, you will automatically have dependencies. So you can show the dependencies, you can hide the dependencies, but you can also cut the dependency of a spot level by selecting it and press on the function button. Once you cut the dependency of an interpolated spot level, it becomes independent. The 3-point interpolation uses the same approach, except that the input are 3 points or 3 spot levels this time. This gives you a third dimension as an input. Therefore, the points will describe a plane, where the plane can extend outside of the initial 3 points. The next interpolation tool I'm going to use is the gradient interpolation, and I'm going to use the circle to demonstrate it more easily. So this tool, basically the input is an initial spot level, and then you can have a fall percentage. Then if I click along the circle, you can see that the interpolated points have a constant fall, therefore the same height all around. We can also see the dependencies. And that means if I change the location of the initial point, all the other ones will update accordingly based on the fall that I introduced first time. We can also see that in the 3D view where the top spot level was where we started and the other ones are below because they have a fall. Once I change the location of the initial spot level, that will also have a repercussion in the 3D where we can see now that they are dependent, but they have a different position. You can also interpolate spot levels with a raise from the parent point instead of a fall. Then you have to use a negative number in the fall percentage. Now you can see that the interpolated spot levels are higher in elevation than the parent point. The next interpolation tool I'm going to introduce you to is the constant gradient interpolation. Here, once again, you need an input, one spot level, and then you press on the function button. Now you get the rubber band, and this is the main difference in between the gradient and the constant gradient interpolation, while here you can set a direction of a fall. So if I use the rubber band to set the direction of the fall on this corner here, then you can basically start clicking or placing new spot levels which are going to be interpolated based on the initial spot level and the fall percentage all together with the fall direction you have set. You can now hit escape when you're done. And if I now show the dependencies, again we'll point toward the parent point and the interpolated points will update according to the position of the parent point. And we can visualize that also in the 3D. Not the least, if I cut the dependency for one of the spot levels and then I update the parent point all around, we can see that that point basically it's not affected by this change, while stays the same. The other ones are following because they are dependent still to the parent point. The last tool is called Create Point Slope to the Land Surface, and it will be described and explained into the Land Surface chapter. Not the least, the spot level settings. The button lays the last in the subchapter, and if you access it, you will basically obtain the default settings if none of the spot levels are selected, and if you select one of the spot levels or more, and you access the settings, you will have the selection settings where you can see how many are selected and how many are editable. Here at the moment we are using the model view options, but you can uncheck that and then you can have your certain appearance for those specific spot levels using custom settings. Important to mention is that your layer control for the element will be defined in the category settings, unless you work in the uncategorized category. Therefore, you cannot change the layer for your element in this menu. That will be overwritten in the category settings, and we will cover that in that part of the video. Not the least, you also have an ID of the spot levels that you can change, a prefix or a suffix. So, for instance, if I add for a prefix, if I write pre, and then for the suffix, I can add another text. For those specific spot levels, you will have an extra text in the annotation where the elevation is shown, where you can add more text to your spot levels. If you want to change the appearance of all the spot levels, of course, you can do that under the model view options and the spot level. Here, based on the category, you can change the specific appearance of the whole spot levels. Here you can see these ones are not changed because they don't follow the model view options. Therefore, you can select them and check this back. If I say OK, now the appearance of these spot levels will follow the ones in the model view options, where I can also add more settings. The LAND4 ridgeline. The ridgeline, it's basically a 3D line running in between spot levels and helps you to control the land surface or define the edge of a surface. So there are a couple of ways to create a LAND4 ridgeline. First, by simply pressing on the function button, you have a palette where you can keep focus and hide input. That means your elevation will be highlighted. So with the first click, you set the first spot level, and then you can just simply start placing other values. Double click when you're done, then you can visualize the line in the 3D already. You can see that basically it's a 3D line that goes in between the spot levels. Another way to create a ridgeline is by simply having a polyline, which can also have curved segments, or using a spline. In this way, if you have spot levels already placed along, you can simply input a couple more. Now we don't see the ridgeline yet because we just simply have a spline or a polyline together with some spot levels. At the moment, we will just see the spot levels highlighted in here. But then if I create it as a ridgeline, I simply need to select what I want to transform into a ridgeline, which is the combination of a spot level and a polyline together. Then I have my ridgeline already. And that will be the same if it's a spline. You can also create multiple at the same time. When creating a contour line, the process is the same except that the contour line will have only one spot level attached to it. Therefore, will be a flat line. So basically creating a contour line with the contour line tool would be the same if you have a simple line with a spot level and then you create it as a ridge line. Because it contains just one height, you would basically have a contour line. Once you have your ridge line or contour line, of course you can change its geometry, and then the result will be that it will just modify also in the 3D. You can always add a spot level to a ridgeline using the add spot level to ridgeline function. So here, if I input now a different elevation, I simply click it on the screen. And then basically the spot levels will be added to the line. Now it becomes a ridgeline out of a contour line. And that would be the same if you basically place the spot level manually over your ridgeline. And then select the line together with the spot levels that you have just added and press on the function button. Then you can see the message that 2 spot levels been added to the ridgeline. You can always check which spot levels are part or not of a ridgeline. For instance, if I have another spot level placed over here, and we are not sure if it's part or not of the ridgeline, you can always select the line and then press on the function button. Then the spot levels highlighted will be shown. Those are the spot levels that are part of the line and spot levels that are not. So once again, if I want to add this to the line, I simply add it. Now the ridgeline adapts. If I try it again, now we can see they're all highlighted, meaning they're all part of the line. You can also create a ridgeline using a fall or a rise by interpolating along it, and then you need to select the line and press on the function button. Here you will have a start input, so if I place, and then you have a raise or a fall. So in this case, if I want to have a raise, I will just place 5%. Then you can have basically a segment distance. Here you can click it if you want to have it as a ridge line in the 3D. Fixed distances, meaning that you will have a spot level generated for 1 meter. So I can place 1 here and 1 at the end. And then I will have a spot level all around generated. When you copy paste a ridge line, if I move it down here, you will be also asked if you want the spot levels included or not. If I say yes, they will be part of it. And that means I will have another line. But you can also copy just the function. And I said no, then I will only have the line. Then again, it's a 2D line, so I'd have no spot levels. So in this case, again, if I want to now use custom distances, I will only have maybe this 3 spot levels. Here in this situation, we can see that it has basically the same raise all along, except that it has fewer spot levels. You can always interpolate more spot levels along a line using the interpolate spot level along a line function. And here now you can simply click and get extra spot levels. Now again, if I check and see which spot levels are part of my line, we can see that's only these 3. So if I want to add them to the line, I need to use this function button again. You can also trim or split a ridge line. You need to use the LAND4 functions for this because you can use the native Archicad ones. So if I now want to split it, we can see there are 2 independent ridge lines also in 3D. Then if I move one of the spot level linked to it, you can see now that the line follows the spot level attached to it. Also, when you want to trim a ridge line, you have to use the LAND4 trim ridge line button. So I'll just create another new ridge line here. And then while you're having it selected, you press on trim ridge line and click on the line. Then in between the nodes, the line in between the nodes will be deleted and you will obtain 2 extra spot levels basically at the nodes in order to control your elevation. You can also use the trim ridgeline function when you have other lines in your project intersecting your ridgeline. So once again, you select the ridgeline you want to trim and the trim function and click on the segment you want to trim out of your ridgeline. Then 2 new points will be interpolated at the end of the line. Then of course the line will also update in the 3D view. You can also control how well the line will be defined or rendered in the 3D. And that you can do it by the arc segmentation parameter under the polyline setting. So you select the line and then under the polyline settings, in this case it is a polyline, you can basically change this parameter. I put it to 1000 and we can see the effect it has in the 3D. This parameter will be expressed in the units you're working in. So if I use 100, now we can see it's better defined and less segmented. Or we can go to 1 millimeter, where the 3D line will be very well defined. This parameter can have a high impact on the speed of processing when using a high detailed ridge line with a small arc segmentation, and then involving that ridge line in controlling your surface, because your surface then will also follow a high detailed ridge line, meaning that in time, using many ridge lines, your project can go slower, but having a higher detail. The settings of the ridgeline in the 2D are again referred to the polyline settings. So here is where you can change anything regards the color or the appearance of the line. The ridgeline settings. To access the ridgeline settings, you basically need to select the line and then access the ridgeline settings. you will go into the selection settings where we can see now we follow the model view option. If you uncheck that, you can have different settings for your line. Under the model view options, we also have a tab for the ridge line where you can also set the ridge line in the 3D, and you can have a different color for the slope pen, but also different settings regards the dependency line appearance. You can, of course, also access the same settings in the 3D view by selecting the line and then again selecting the ridge line settings, where again you have the model view option, or you can use certain settings for that specific ridge line. While here we have the model view option set to, let's say, green. If I now go back and check that to follow the model view option, our line will become green. You also have the chance to place a slope line to your ridge line. So if I go back to the settings of this ridge line here, we can see here we have the slope line side. So let's say we put it to the right. Then we have also options of the length and of the distance in between the slope lines. So first I'll confirm that, and we can see the slope lines. But then I can also change the distance in between and the length of them, or the ratio. More, you can change also the side of the slope, left or right, or simply to the both. The LAND4 Fall Line. The fall line is a dynamic object that offers you a visual representation of a fall gradient and a fall direction in between two LAND4 spot levels. The fall line subgroup lays the second on the main palette, and you have only two buttons here. So you have the button for placing a fall line, and then you have the fall line settings. To place a fall line, you simply click on the function button, and then you simply click on the spot levels that you want to have a fall line in between. As you can see on my screen, I have 3 different spot levels from different categories, and that's not a problem when placing a fall line. The only condition is, when placing a fall line, that you have 2 spot levels that you want to show the fall in between. When elevating also a spot level, the fall line will adapt, being dynamic. Another way to place a fall line in between 2 spot levels is to select the spot levels and then press on the function button. Having the fall line active, when you move again or you change the position of the spot level, the fall line will update. Under the model view options for LAND4 fall line, you have different settings. So you have the slope input, where you can show percent per mil or ratio. You can change it to per mil here. And then you have different settings about the appearance or the fall line start offset or end offset. Different settings also regards the fall line text. So I changed this to per mil. You can see that everything basically adapts. If I want to have one of the fall lines having a certain appearance, I can select it and access the fall line settings, which brings me to the selection settings. We can see how many we have again selected here, and then I can uncheck the model view option. Here I have the slope unit into percent, and then I can also change the appearance or the color of the pen. I can also change the line starting offset to 250 in this case, while here I had 500. So basically the line offset, it's the difference or the distance in between the spot level and where it starts and where it ends. If I want to bring it back to the model view option, to the general settings, I simply click it back, and then we will have the same slope input that I chose in the model view option. Not the least, when working with the elevation palette, when the function button is active and you select a fall line, then you will get to the elevation palette easier. That's just an easy way to access your elevation palette through the fall line selection. The land surface. The land surface is a dynamic 3D LAND4 object and it's created from spot levels, ridge lines, and contour lines. In the following part of the video, I will show you how to create, edit, and how to work with the settings of the land surface. When working with a land surface in the plan view or in the 2D, you're basically working with the fill tool. So the land surface in the plan view is built on the fill tool. Therefore, the settings that you have set in the default settings for the fill will basically apply for the surface. If I start in create a land surface here by pressing the function button, using this way, you will basically define the geometry for your land surface, just like you do when you create a fill. You can see the automatic selection of the elements of the spot levels that are going to be used. And then you need to confirm that operation. Now you have your land surface created. And we can also see it in the 3D. When creating a land surface, the active category is very important. So if I create a surface now, once again, we can see that the elements are selected based on the category. So for instance, if I move two of the spot levels into another category, and then I try to create my surface in existing, we can see that those 2 points are not included in the automatic selection because they're in a different category. You can, of course, add them manually anytime you want. I can also check my links. We can see that those 2 are not part of my surface. We can also see that in the 3D view. And for instance, if I modify these spot levels at the edge, they will have an effect on the land surface, and we can see that those 2 spot levels are basically not part of the surface. This is just another efficient way to control which elements in the active category will be considered when creating a land surface. Another way to create a land surface is by using some predefined geometries. So I will have 2 polygons here. And when I'm using the magic wand within the area of the first polygon, you can see now the land surface is created for that area. And that also means if, for instance, I just change the geometry of the fill, then the land surface will update also in the 3D. Again, you're working with the fill in the plan view. But now if I want to use the outer boundary, which is just a 2D line, a polyline for now, and I use that as an input for the magic wand, we can see the selection again of the spot levels. We can see that the land surface edge is representing the surface, and it stops to the boundary defined by the last spot levels going around the surface. Even though the fill goes basically up to the edge defined by the polyline. And that's because there is not enough 3D information. But now I create it as a ridge line, which contains 3D information. So when I will use the ridge line I created for the outer boundary, all together with the geometry of the polyline, therefore the ridge line, we can see in the selection there also this included automatically. And I confirm. Now the surface goes to the edge of the ridge line. If I change the geometry of the ridge line or of the polyline in 2D, then also the ridge line will update in the 3D, but not the surface. That meaning, once again, because the surface is controlled by the fill, I also have to update the fill as well. So if I drag it up to the polyline edge, then again, I can create and control the surface up to there. Because the land surface in the 2D is controlled by the fill, you can also easily create a hole in the surface, just like you would do it with a fill in Archicad. So if I use the spline as a geometry, I select the surface, the fill, and press on the fill tool. Now, using the magic wand, I can basically cut out this shape out of my surface. When, of course, we'll automatically update in the 3D. Adding and releasing elements from the land surface. So you can always add or remove a LAND4 object from the surface. So for instance, if I take this ridgeline, have both selection, I press the function button, then the ridgeline will be added to the surface. We can always check what elements are part of the surface. So we can see also the ridgeline, it's part of it. But you can also release it from the surface by once again selecting the relevant surface and the element you want to release. Now, if I'm checking the links for the surface, I can see that the ridgeline is not part of the surface anymore. Interoperability tools in between the land surface and the Archicad mesh. The next tool enables you to generate a mesh out of your land surface. So if you select the land surface and press on the function button, you can now see that we have a mesh which was generated over. In the 3D, we can now also visualize it. And this new mesh will basically follow the settings that you have in the mesh settings. Further on, you can also generate spot levels from your existing mesh, or you can generate a land surface. When extracting spot levels from your mesh or creating a land surface, be aware of the amount of nodes that compose the mesh. The add-on LAND4 will basically extract a spot level for each of the nodes, unless you use the filter. Here you can set a distance in between the spot levels that are going to be extracted from your existing mesh. When you use no filter at all, basically each node will generate a spot level. If I close up to this corner, we can see there are a bunch of nodes in there based on the triangulation, and those spot levels are generated very close to each other. However, if I use the filter, I can basically set a minimum distance in between the spot levels that are going to be extracted from the mesh. In this way, I can just eliminate or filter out spot levels that they are very close to each other based on the initial triangulation. The land surface settings. The land surface settings can be accessed from the last button on the land surface submenu. And here you will have 4 menus: the 3D structure, the level lines, the surface settings, and settings regards the volumetric surface. If I start with the 3D structure, you have also 4 options in here. So you can have surface only, you can have surface with thickness, where you can input a thickness to your surface, all together with a building material. The terrain body can have a base at a certain elevation, and also a surface material and a building material. And the last is the composite, where you can add a composite to your surface, and this part will be explained a little bit further in the video. The settings you will apply in the default settings will basically follow all the surfaces that you are creating, just like you would do it in any other Archicad element. I will set my 3D structure as surface with thickness. I'll use grass for the surface material, and for the building material, I will set soil with a surface thickness of 1 meter. If I now hit OK and I create my land surface, we can see now that those settings are applied to my surface and basically will follow to all the surfaces that I will create from here on. If you select the surface and access those settings, you will access the selection settings, where you can see how many elements you have selected. Here you can change to other parameters. If I change it now to surface only, or terrain body, where I can have a base level of, let's say, 30 meter, that means that the elevation for the base is 30 meter flat, and the top will of course follow the land surface. Then you can also place composites to your land surface. So in the 3D structure, you can select the composites, but then you also have to select the composite from the following menu over here, where you activate the button, and then you have certain composites that you basically created in the composite tool that you can apply to your surface. So this pick box will be always updated with the composites that you have in the composite tool. But then once again, if you have selected composites here and then you select the composite you want to add and hit OK, then your surface will follow that specific composite that you applied. Back to the settings, then we have the level lines. So you can show level lines in the 3D view, in the 2D view. You can have a start, an elevation from where the level lines to start and where to end. But then you also have a height distance. So I can set a height distance in between the level lines and how to be shown. And if I place it to every 300, for instance, then we'll get this. And of course, they will be also shown in the plan view. You can also change the settings in the plan view. The next is the interval level lines, where you can have an interval height distance divider. So if I have a 300, if I want to have this shown, if I want to have a 4 divider or 4 interval level lines in between each main level line, that means we will have 75 millimeters in between. So if I place that, we can see that also on the screen. Of course, you also have settings regards the color you show your level lines, but also your interval level lines, where you can also have a different appearance for it. The land surface is dynamic. That means every time you move a spot level all around, the whole land surface will basically update in real time. You can also place a section over your land surface. And then accessing the section view, you can visualize the building material that are composing your land surface. More settings that can be applied to your land surface are placed under the surface settings. So you have the naming here, where you can have an individual name for each surface, but you can also show the land surface name box checkbox. So if you have this checkbox on, that means every time you create a land surface, you will get the naming box where you can place a name for your land surface every time you create one, such as here. So if I give it a name, then I access the selection settings, I can now see the name that I've inputted in the name box. Then you can show the triangulation for your land surface. And when you edit the surface, also the triangulation will update. More settings are described in here. For instance, you can also change the color of the section pan and the override land surface cut and fill in the section view. So for instance, the section pan, if I want to change it to blue, this color will apply to the section pan in the section view. The level lines also have a couple of more settings. When I create my surface, for instance, if I select the surface, we can see we have some purple buttons over here, and that refers to the spot level text. If I want to show the text manually on each of them, I can simply click on the button, and then now it says on, and on one side it says off. So when I'm on the on, I can simply click it, and then the text for the level line will be placed there. I can also show these automatically for all of them. So if I come to attributes under the level lines, we can see text display options. This says set each text manually, like we done it before, but we can also show all or hide all. So if I say show all, we will have a text for each level line. There will also, we can set the distance in between these texts or how dense they should be. So we can change the distance in here where it says minimum distance between level texts. So if I want them to be closer, I can put it to half every 5 meters, and then we have more text over the lines. But you can also hide all. For more information about the land surface settings, please check our documentation. Not the least, we also have the Volumetrics tab where you can set different coloring for the fill, cut, and neutral material, but also settings about the stamp text. Another important setting that helps you control the land surface is the arc segmentation distance. This refers to how well detailed and segmented the surface will be along curved segments. This parameter can be changed under the surface settings, and here you have the arc segmentation distance. So to exemplify it, if I change it now to 1000, we can see how segmented the surface is compared to the ridge line that defines the edge. We can also see that in the 2D view, where we have the land surface edge and the curved segment. If we measure, we can see that the max distance in between the surface and the edge is 1000 millimeters because that's the unit we work in. On the other side, if I change the arc segmentation to a low value, such as 10, we can see now that the edge is very well defined and follows precisely the ridge line. This parameter can be very important when dealing with large number or complex surfaces in your project. It's basically a choice in between the speed of the 3D rendering and the high detail of your land surfaces. Another setting refers to the ridgeline setting. So here, if I have a contour, for instance, which I'll just place at the level of the land surface, and then I add it to my surface. So using this parameter, it's important that the ridgeline is basically part of the surface. So when showing the triangulation, we can see that the ridgeline detail distance refers to the amount of triangles that are going to be created when the ridgeline is part of the surface. So if I increase this to 1000, for instance, the distance in between the triangles increases. Therefore, you will have less triangles over your surface. If I decrease this, we'll have a smaller distance in between the triangles, therefore more triangles. Interpolation tools based on the land surface. Once you have your land surface, there are also other tools you can use in relation with it. First, create point to the land surface. So if I have a spot level, which is above the surface, so it's not part of the surface, so I place it here at an elevation of 43 meters. We can see it's above the surface. I can basically use both that point and the land surface all together. And I can have also an input as a fall percentage. So I can project the point to the surface on a direction, which generates me a point over the surface using parent points, where the input, we can also see on the dependency lines, the input is basically the land surface and the initial point we have placed above the surface. So we have 3 points over the surface because those are used to generate that point as well. I can also place a fall line, and we can see the fall line indicates the fall that we have established in the fall palette when interpolating this point. When changing the location of the parent point we use initially, the interpolated point will follow and will still be projected on the surface in relation with the surface and the initial point that we have established. The next interpolation tool based on the land surface is the ridge slope. So here I have ridge line, which is not part of the surface. You can see it here in the 3D. It just lays on top of the surface. I can generate ridge slopes that are linked or they are a result of the ridge line and the land surface. So as an input, you select the line and the surface and then press on the function button. Here you have a palette where you can input a full percentage and then you can click on each side of the line. So I can generate one on the other side as well. Now in the 3D, we can visualize the ridge slopes that follow the terrain and have a 50% fall on each side of the initial ridge line. If I modify the geometry of the initial ridge line, the ridge slopes will follow accordingly. The LAND4 Drape function. This tool allows you to drape Archicad objects or 2D lines, polylines, or splines to your land surface. So if I place a couple of trees in here, we can take a look in the 3D. They are now placed at the 0 level. But if now I drape them to the surface by selecting both the elements and the surface, we can see that they basically now are following the surface all around at the same elevation where the surface is. If I also move the element anywhere along the surface, the tree, in this case, will follow the surface. You can also undrape an element. In this way, it becomes independent from the surface, and you can basically move it anywhere along. Now the list, you can also use drape with offset. So here, if I input an offset, 1 meter for instance, then my element will be draped on the surface. However, it will keep 1 meter above the surface. So once again, if you move it, it will be still linked or draped to the surface, but it will keep the same buffer that you have inputted in the function. Other Archicad elements you can drape to a land surface are the columns. So if I place some columns, in this case they are underneath the surface, once again you can drape them to the surface and they will follow accordingly. This will apply to all elements you have under the column tool. You can also drape 2D lines to your surface, polylines and splines. So first I'll use a polyline here, and then underneath I'll use a spline in a closed circuit. Once you have them draped to the surface, they will become a 3D object. So they will become a 3D line that will follow the surface accordingly. When modifying the land surface by changing, for instance, one or more of the spot levels, the surface will adapt, of course, being dynamic, but also the line draped to the surface will adapt. If I want to drape it with offset, I simply need to select the spline and the surface and then input an offset. So if I put 1.5 meters, for instance, in this situation, the ridge line has been created. So we have once again our line, which is basically follow the terrain with an offset of 1.5 meters. These lines can be later used into your project in designing your new terrain. LAND4 Volumetrics. So this tool enables you to compare two land surfaces where the result is a volumetric surface. This third surface is a result and basically showing you the height or the level difference in between the selected land surfaces. I'll first start by creating the first surface, call it LAND4 existing, by using the elements in here, and I'll give it a name, LAND4 existing. Now the surface is created and we can already see it in the 3D view. For the second surface, I'll basically use the elements that I already have in new into a new layer. And then if I show that, we can now see they have also a different appearance. I can also select them using the selection palette. So we can see each spot level for new correspond to one spot level in existing. So they are the same at the moment. If I now create the LAND4 new surface, we can see already that the elements are selected only in new category, and I can input the name. So now we have two identical land surfaces And if I use tab, we can see that they are basically in different layers as well. I'll change the surface material for LAND4 new, and now they are just overlapped. By deleting some of the spot levels in the new category and the new surface, we can now see in the 3D view that the surfaces are already different, and there is an area where it's cut and an area where it's fill in between the surfaces. Before creating the volumetric surface, I can also set a certain category for this third surface, and then I can use the function button called create volumetric surface. Here I have the option for first and the second surface. So the first surface is the one I want to compare to, and the second one is the one I want to compare with. I can now draw also a polygon representing the area I want to have involved in the comparison. And then as a result, I get the volumetric stamp. Here I have information regards the fill and cut volume, or if I have to add or remove from the site. In the 3D, we can see that basically the volumetric surface represents the area we had initially drawn in the plan view. But if I delete this, I can also recreate the surface by just using the magic wand and the whole parameter used for both of the surfaces. As now we can see that the whole area is taken into consideration. Using the gravity tool under the place spot level tool, both in 2D and 3D, we can hover above and see exactly the values representing the level for the cut and the fill, or the neutral area where it's supposed to be 0. This surface also has its own settings that you can access, where you can change different materials for the fill, the cut, and you have options about your stamp. But not least, you can also place level lines over the volumetric surface, just as you would do it with any other surface, where you can show them, for instance, in 3D. I can set, for example, if I start with the fill, I can start and place a height distance for the level lines of 50 millimeters, and then the color or the pen for the level lines marked as green. And now we can see them on the resulting surface, offering us a better interpretation of the volumes involved. But once again, you can also use the gravity tool to read individual heights along. If you would like to place level lines over the cut, which is represented by the volumetric surface below 0, you have to be aware of that in the threshold for the level lines. So the start level should go below 0 to a level below the minimum elevation of the resulting surface, and the end level up to 0. This way we will only represent the cut over the land surface with the level lines. Of course, we can also read and place spot level using the gravity tool. The level lines over the volumetric surface can be also shown in the 2D by simply using the check mark in the settings of the volumetric surface. The volumetric surface is also dynamic, so if you change elements or modify one of the surface, then also the land surface altogether with the volumetric surface will update accordingly. However, the stamp is not dynamic, therefore you have to select it and press on recalculate volumetrics. Then the stamp will update with the new results. Import and export functions in LAND4. There are a couple of files you can import and export using LAND4. First, the Files menu lays here on the main palette, and you have 5 buttons, where the first is the import from a LandXML file. The LandXML file can contain surfaces, 3D points, and 3D lines. Then you can import XYZ file. This refers to spot levels, so 3D points that are stored in a text, XYZ, or CSV file. Then you can export them to a CSV file, again refers to the points only in the project. And then you can export the LandXML file, or you can export your project as a LandXML file, where again you can have and store surfaces, lines, and 3D points. The last button refers to the SOSI file, which is a file used in the Norwegian market, and this will be covered in our help center. I'll start by the LandXML import first. Every time you make an import, you can either use the project origin or you can use the survey point. In this part of the video, we'll deal with the project origin, which usually refers to files or coordinates in real world coordinates. Here, we can now select the file and say open. The file is now loaded and we have it on the plan view. What we can see is the fill altogether with the spot levels. So basically, the settings you have in the fill default settings will of course be implemented in the import. And then you have the LandSurface settings. So the ones you have in the default settings before importing the file, those will be the parameters or the settings applied to the surface that you imported based on your default settings. I can now also see that in the 3D. So this is our terrain. Because we set the default settings to have surface with thickness and certain parameters, our surface will be imported with these settings. Otherwise, the LandXML file doesn't contain volumes, so you will only have basically the surface along with the points and the lines. I will make the same import, just this time I will use the survey point. So if I go and zoom to the survey point, we can see that the project origin and survey point are overlapped. So I'll try to move the survey point and then make the import. So when you use the import based on the survey point, you have to first move the survey point to the location, to the reference location you want to reference your import to. So I use 25 meters northing and easting from the project origin difference. So when I create now or I make the new import, I should have the same distance in between the import. So I choose the survey point and the same file. And now we can see basically that the whole project, it's just translated or moved with the same distance that we inputted, or the same difference in between the project origin and the survey point. When exporting a LandXML file, you will basically export whatever elements are shown in the project. So by using the layer management, you can basically show or hide the layers, therefore the elements that you want to export. So the LandXML export will be done based on the layers, what's shown and what is hidden. That's basically what's going to be exported into your file. But then you access the function button, and here you just have to be aware that you export by either project origin or the survey point. In this case, I will use the project origin because I import it based on real world coordinates, and then I can just input a name. Then I press save and my file is exported. The same rules applies when you are importing or exporting an XYZ file. So I will press on the function button, which gets me to the import menu, where you select the file. And here you will have a few choices. You have the tabulator, ID, category, the unit your coordinates are in, and then again import by project origin or survey point. If your file is in real world coordinates, you will use project origin. I will also show you the file. And first, the file I have first contains an ID. Then your file might contain also information about each point, if it represents the terrain or if it represents a boundary. Then you have the X, Y, and Z value of each point, and together with the tabulator. We recommend you to open the file before importing it into a notepad so you can see its structure. So back to the import. Now I know my tabulator is semicolon. I have the ID in the first column. Then I can choose the category, the unit, and import it by project origin. Can now press open And then my file, it's imported as spot levels in Archicad. Then if I want to make an import based on the survey point, I can go first into the location settings. You can also change the location of your survey point here. And this time I'll use 50 meters northing, easting, and 50 meters northing. If now I zoom out a little, I can see basically the difference or the distance in between the survey point and project origin. So basically, if I do the import again, this time using the survey point, we can see that the file now is imported using the same distance that I have inputted from the project origin to the survey point. In this way, you can do a safe import without risking changing your project location. So you can base your imports based on the survey point or project origin. It's important you don't move the survey point afterwards because, of course, the file will still be imported in the location you initially made the import to. When exporting your spot levels to a CSV file, once again, the points shown on the plan view will be exported as well. So here, once again, you can export it by project origin or survey point. And once you input a name and press save, then your file or your spot levels will be exported into a CSV file.